My mother-in-law insisted I switch from Islam to Christianity to marry her son, so I revealed her racism online. Can you imagine fighting for your relationship, for your very identity, only to have the man you love, the man you're about to marry, suddenly waver? What would you do if everything you'd endured for 3 years, all the bigotry and hatred, threatened to unravel because his mother made one phone call, crying? My mother-in-law. Oh man, where do I even begin? She hated me from day one, and honestly, it felt like she was just waiting for an excuse. My boyfriend, bless his heart, actually warned her I was Muslim before our first meeting. So what does she do? She serves pork. Then feigns total shock, claiming she didn't know Muslims couldn't eat it. Like seriously? Was this woman living under a rock? Next visit, it got worse. She looked me dead in the eye and demanded I take off my hijab in her house because it disrespected Christ. I actually thought she was joking. My jaw dropped, but she wasn't. She was stone cold serious. I was so flabbergasted I couldn't even process it. After that, I just stopped visiting. Who needs that kind of toxicity? But then the guilt trip began. Tears, promises to do better. Against every fiber of my being, I gave her another chance. And for a year, she was tolerable. Just the occasional bomb joke, you know? As a Muslim woman, I'm so used to that kind of humor. I sometimes even laugh just to get through it. She took that as permission to escalate. And escalate she did. I caught her, sneaking pork into my food. My blood ran cold. When I confronted her, she just stood there, speechless. Her face was a mask of guilt. My boyfriend and I left immediately. I went no contact. For an entire year, not a peep from her. Not one text. Not one phone call. Then my boyfriend proposed. And that's when everything exploded. A few months after we got engaged, my fiancé sat me down. My heart sank. Mom has a request, he said, his voice hesitant. She says, it's non-negotiable if you want to marry me. I stared at him, my stomach clenching. What? She demands you get baptized, denounce Islam, and convert to Christianity. I didn't just laugh. I roared. I couldn't help it. It was so utterly ridiculous. Is she serious? I asked, wiping tears of disbelief from my eyes. He nodded, completely serious. My laughter died. Tell her to shove her Christianity where the sun doesn't shine. I snapped, my voice laced with fury. He hugged me, told me he supported me completely. He said he was on my side. But apparently he told her exactly what I said, word for word. Yesterday, she showed up at our house while he was at work, pounding on the door like a maniac. And like an idiot, I made the mistake of letting her in. How dare you disrespect Christianity and tell me to stick it where the sun doesn't shine? She shrieked, marching into my living room. I actually chuckled, which, of course, just made her angrier. What's funny about insulting my faith? What's funny? I shot back, my voice dangerously calm. Is you, a grown woman, trying to control how I live my life? I'm trying to save your soul. You're going to hell. According to your beliefs, not mine. I folded my arms. Either you convert or there's no wedding. Then you're not invited, I said, my voice firm. She sneered. I'll show up anyway and object. I don't care. You're converting. You're acting insane. I'll stop when you convert. I won't have my son marry a smelly foreigner. That was it. That was the line. I exploded. This, I spat, my voice shaking with rage, is why your husband left you. Your racism and hatred are disgusting. The only reason your son still talks to you is pity. You're pathetic, and everyone knows it. She left in tears, screaming that she'd make sure I converted. Within hours, she was on Facebook, posting about her horrible daughter-in-law who said such cruel things. No context, of course. Just my words, twisted and how hurt she was. Our phones immediately started blowing up with angry messages from family members. So we made our own post. And you know what? We detailed everything. Every racist incident, every Islamophobic comment, the forced pork, the hijab disrespect. We ended it by saying anyone supporting her was supporting racism and bigotry. The apologies flooded in. Finally, we clarified in another post. She was banned from our wedding. And anyone who objected to that, they could stay home too. Her own siblings called her out. Her church friends were appalled. Even her sister commented, "Jane, I've watched you bully this poor girl for 3 years. You're reaping what you sowed." She tried damage control, claiming she was misunderstood, that she just wanted her son to be equally yoked with a Christian. But people had screenshots of her calling me a terrorist in old posts she'd conveniently forgotten about. Then came the real kicker. Comments started rolling in from other ex-girlfriends of my fiancé. She called me a papist for being Catholic. She said my Hindu family worshipped demons. She literally sprinkled holy water on me when she found out I was atheist. Turns out I wasn't her first victim, just the first to fight back publicly. My fiancé was furious. He called her. I heard him through the door, his voice thick with anger. "You're done. No wedding, no grandkids, no more chances. You chose hate over your son." She sobbed. She begged. She promised to change. He hung up. That night we thought it was over. We'd won. She was out of our lives. The family supported us, and we could have our wedding in peace. This morning, everything felt lighter. We even joked about it over breakfast, how she'd probably end up alone with her hatred for company. But then my fiancé called from work. "Hey, can we talk tonight?" My stomach dropped. About what? "I've been thinking about Mom and the wedding." "No. What about it?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "I know he said she couldn't come, but she's still my mother. Maybe we should reconsider." "Are you serious right now?" My blood ran cold. "Just hear me out when I get home." She called me crying, and she sounds really broken. Broken? I was shaking with disbelief. She called me a smelly foreigner yesterday. I know, but people say things when they're upset. "Look, we'll talk tonight. I love you." He hung up. I sat there, staring at my phone, praying this was some sick joke. Yesterday he called her toxic. Yesterday he supported me completely. Yesterday he chose me over her. But today he wants to reconsider. 3 years of racism. 3 years of Islamophobia. 3 years of her trying to erase who I am. And one phone call from Mommy, crying might undo it all. The wedding is in 2 months. The invitations are sent. Everyone knows she's banned. If he's serious about this, if he actually wants to invite her after everything, then maybe I need to reconsider more than just the guest list. Maybe I need to reconsider the whole wedding. I stared at my phone for 20 minutes after he hung up, my hands shaking so badly I nearly dropped it twice. The words, "She sounds really broken," kept playing over and over in my head like some sick recording I couldn't turn off. I set the phone down on the coffee table and watched my hands tremble in my lap. Yesterday he stood up to her, told her she was done, hung up on her crying. Today, one phone call, and suddenly we need to reconsider. I felt like I was watching our entire relationship fall apart in real time, and there was nothing I could do to stop it. The engagement ring on my finger caught the light, and I twisted it around, wondering if I'll still be wearing it tomorrow. My chest felt tight, and I couldn't seem to take a full breath. 3 years of racism. 3 years of her trying to erase who I am, and one crying phone call might undo everything. I grabbed my phone again and pulled up Kiana's contact because she's the only person who won't tell me I'm overreacting or that I should give Jane another chance. She answered on the first ring. Kiana listened while I told her everything, not interrupting once. When I finished, there was a pause. Then she said exactly what I needed to hear. She told me not to make any decisions until he got home, and I heard what he actually wanted. She reminded me that he might just need to talk through his guilt, that it doesn't mean he's changed his mind completely. I wanted to believe her, but my stomach was in knots. We talked for another 10 minutes, and she made me promise to call her after he got home, no matter how late it was. I hung up, feeling slightly less panicked, but still scared of what's coming. The hours until he got home felt like days. I spent them pacing our apartment, walking from the living room to the kitchen and back again. Every time I passed the dining table, I saw the wedding invitations we addressed last week, stacked neatly in a box, ready to mail. We were so confident when we sent those out, so sure that we'd won and Jane was out of our lives for good. I picked up one of the invitations and ran my finger over the raised lettering. We spent weeks picking out the design, making sure it honored both our faiths. Now I was looking at it, wondering if there would even be a wedding. I set it back down and kept pacing. I checked my phone every 5 minutes, even though I knew he wouldn't be home until 6 p.m. Time moved so slowly. I started to think my phone clock was broken. I made tea I didn't drink, turned on the TV, and couldn't focus on anything playing. My mind kept going back to his voice on the phone. How tired he sounded. How guilty. That guilt was what scared me most, because guilt makes people do stupid things. When my fiancé finally walked through the door at 6, he looked exhausted and guilty, which made my stomach drop all over again. He set his keys down on the counter and didn't quite meet my eyes. He sat down at the kitchen table and gestured for me to join him. I sat across from him, my hands folded tight in my lap to keep them from shaking. He took a deep breath and asked me to just listen before I responded. I nodded, but I was already bracing myself for whatever he was about to say. He started talking, and I felt my whole body tense up. Jane had called him at work today, sobbing so hard he could barely understand her. She told him she'd been having panic attacks since yesterday, that she couldn't sleep, that losing him was killing her. She said she knew she messed up and she wanted to make it right. She was willing to apologize to me, willing to go to therapy, willing to do whatever it takes if we'll just let her come to the wedding. My fiancé's voice cracked a little as he told me this, and I could see how much her pain was affecting him. He said she sounded genuinely broken, not manipulative like usual. He said, maybe this is the wake-up call she needed. Maybe she's finally ready to change. I sat there listening, and everything in me was screaming that this was exactly how she'd manipulated him for years. But I kept my mouth shut like I promised. When he finished talking, I took a slow breath and asked him one question. I kept my voice calm even though my heart was racing. I asked if he actually believed she'd changed, or if he just wanted to believe it because she's his mother and it's easier than dealing with the guilt. He opened his mouth, closed it, looked down at his hands. The silence stretched out between us, and I knew the answer before he said anything. Finally, he admitted he didn't know, but she's his mother and he felt guilty watching her suffer like this. I pointed out that her suffering was the direct result of 3 years of racism and hatred, not something we did to her randomly. I reminded him about the pork she snuck into my food, about her calling me a smelly foreigner just yesterday, about her demanding I convert to Christianity. I asked him if he thought one day of crying erases 3 years of abuse. He got defensive and said she's trying, that she's never offered to go to therapy before. I told him that trying isn't the same as changing, that words are easy, but actions are what matter. We went back and forth like this for 2 hours, the same arguments in circles. He kept bringing up family obligation, how she raised him alone, how he's all she has. I kept bringing up self-respect, about how I shouldn't have to beg for basic human decency from my mother-in-law. He says she's his mother, and I say I'm supposed to be his wife. He says maybe we could set boundaries, and I say we've tried that before, and she trampled right over them. Neither of us would budge an inch. The kitchen got darker as the sun set, but neither of us got up to turn on the lights. We just sat there in the growing shadows, going in circles until my throat was raw from talking. Finally, I stood up and told him I needed space to think, that I was staying at Kiana's tonight. He looked hurt and asked if that's really necessary. I told him, yes, it is, because I can't think clearly when I'm this upset and this scared. He didn't argue, just nodded and looked down at the table. that somehow made it worse because it felt like he was already choosing his mother over fighting for us. If he really wanted me to stay, he'd fight harder. He'd beg me not to go. Instead, he just sat there looking miserable and guilty. I packed a bag in our bedroom, throwing in clothes and my phone charger. My hands were shaking again as I zipped the bag closed. When I came back out, he was still sitting at the table in the dark. I told him I'd call him tomorrow, and he nodded without looking up. I walked out and closed the door behind me, and the click of the lock felt way too final. At Kiana's house, I broke down completely the second she opened the door. She pulled me inside, and I was crying so hard I could barely breathe. Tyson came out from the kitchen and took my bag while Kiana guided me to their couch. I told them everything between sobs. How he wants to reconsider, how guilty he feels, how he thinks maybe Jane has really changed this time. Kiana held my hand and let me cry. When I finally calmed down enough to talk normally, Tyson sat down across from me. He dealt with his own toxic parent situation years ago. Cut his father out of his life after years of abuse. He looked at me seriously and said something that hit me right in the chest. He told me that people who love you don't ask you to compromise your identity to make their lives easier. He said, real love protects you. It doesn't put you in harm's way to make someone else comfortable. If my fiancé can't see that, then maybe you need to think hard about whether this marriage is really what you want. I woke up the next morning on Kiana's couch with my neck stiff and my eyes swollen from crying. She was already in the kitchen making coffee, and the smell pulled me off the couch, even though I wanted to stay buried under the blanket forever. She handed me a mug without saying anything, just sat down next to me and waited. I took a sip and it burned my tongue, but I didn't care. After a few minutes of silence, she finally spoke. She told me I should call my cousin Harmony, the one who married a Christian guy, even though our Muslim family had a fit about it at first. Kiana said Harmony dealt with interfaith drama for years and might have some perspective I needed right now. I wasn't sure I wanted to talk to anyone else about this mess, but Kiana is right that Harmony would understand in a way most people wouldn't. I pulled out my phone and stared at Harmony's contact for a while before I actually pressed call. She answered on the third ring, sounding confused because we don't talk that often. I told her what's happening with my fiancé and Jane, the whole story spilling out in one long rush. When I finished, there was silence on the other end for so long I thought the call dropped. Then Harmony started talking, and she doesn't sugarcoat anything. She told me her husband's family accepted her faith from the very first day she met them. His mother asked questions about Islam because she genuinely wanted to understand, not because she was looking for ammunition to use against Harmony. Later, his father told her she was welcome at their table exactly as she was, hijab and all. Harmony says that acceptance is the only reason her marriage works, because she never had to defend her right to exist as herself in her own home. She never had to wonder if her husband would choose her over his parents when things got hard. The contrast to my situation hit me like a punch to the stomach. Harmony kept going, her voice getting more serious. She asked me if I've really thought about what it means that my fiancé is wavering now before we're even married. She says this is a massive red flag about how he'll handle Jane's future demands, because there will always be future demands with a woman like that. She asks if I really want to spend my entire life negotiating my humanity with my mother-in-law, having to justify my existence every single holiday and family gathering. The question sat heavy in my chest because I knew the answer and I hated it. My phone buzzed with a text while I was still on the call with Harmony. It's from my fiancé asking when I'm coming home so we can talk more. I told Harmony I needed to go, and she made me promise to really think about what she said. After we hung up, I stared at his text for a long time before responding. I typed that I needed another day, that I'm not ready to come home yet. He texted back almost immediately saying he understands, but he misses me. And the message made me feel guilty and angry at the same time. Guilty because he sounds sad and I hate hurting him. Angry because he's the one who created the situation by wavering in the first place. I showed the text to Kiana, and she just shook her head. We spent the rest of the day going through my wedding planning documents, spread across her dining room table. The venue contract with the deposit we can't get back. The catering agreement with the halal menu the chef spent weeks perfecting for us. The invitation list with all the guests who already know Jane is banned. The photographer we booked a year ago. The flowers, the cake, the DJ, all of it planned and paid for, and suddenly feeling so uncertain. Looking at all these papers made everything real in a way it wasn't before. I might actually have to cancel this wedding. I might have to call all these vendors and tell them, never mind, the marriage is off. The thought made me want to throw up. Kiana put her hand on mine and asked if I'm okay. I'm not okay, but I don't know how to explain the specific way I'm not okay, so I just shook my head. That evening, I texted my fiancé again. I told him I'll come home tomorrow, but only if he agrees to go to couples therapy before we make any decisions about Jane. I needed to know we can work through this with professional help, that we're not just going to keep having the same argument in circles until one of us gives up. He responded immediately with, yes, he'll do therapy, whatever I need. The quick agreement gave me a tiny bit of hope that maybe he's taking this seriously, that maybe we can actually fix this. I slept better that night than I did the night before, even though I'm still on Kiana's couch. The next morning, I packed my bag and Kiana drove me home. She hugged me before I got out of the car and told me to call her if I need anything anytime. I walked up to our apartment and unlocked the door, not sure what I was going to find. The apartment was spotless. He'd cleaned everything, even the bathroom, which he usually avoids. There's dinner already cooking on the stove, pasta with the sauce I like from the Italian place down the street. It's his way of showing he cares when he doesn't have the words, and normally it would make me melt. Today, it just made me sad because cleaning and cooking can't fix what's broken between us. We ate in awkward silence at the kitchen table, both of us afraid to start another fight. The pasta tasted like nothing, even though I know it's good. After dinner, he pulled out his phone and showed me Jane's messages. There were dozens of them. Long paragraphs about how sorry she is, Bible verses about forgiveness and family, old photos from his childhood. I scrolled through them and saw exactly what she's doing. She's working on his emotions in a systematic way, hitting every guilt button she installed in him over 30 years of raising him alone. I pointed out that she's not actually apologizing for her racism or her Islamophobia. She's just sorry for hurting him and causing problems in our relationship. She's making it about his pain, not about her actions or my pain. He looked at the messages again, really reading them this time instead of just reacting to them. I watched his face change as he realized I'm right. She hasn't said a single word about respecting me or my faith. She hasn't acknowledged that calling me a smelly foreigner was wrong. She's just sad that her behavior has consequences for her. We spent the next hour searching for therapists who specialize in interfaith relationships and family conflict. We found one named Sheldon Carson, who has good reviews and experience with situations like ours. He had an emergency appointment available in 3 days. We booked it immediately. Those 3 days felt like walking on eggshells in our own home. We were polite to each other, careful not to trigger another argument, but there was a distance between us that wasn't there before. We slept in the same bed, but didn't touch. We ate meals together, but didn't really talk. The apartment felt smaller somehow, like the walls were pressing in. I caught him looking at his phone several times, and I know Jane is still texting him, still working on him, still trying to manipulate her way back into our lives. I went back to work the next day because sitting at home thinking about everything makes it worse. My coworker Faye found me in the break room, staring at my coffee like it had answers. She sat down across from me and waited until I looked up. I gave her the short version, the really short version, about my fiancé wanting to reconsider banning his racist mother from our wedding. Faye's face went through about 5 different expressions before settling on concern. She told me about her friend who called off a wedding 2 weeks before the date because her fiancé kept defending his racist parents. The friend had tried everything, therapy and boundaries and long conversations, but her fiancé always went back to making excuses for them. Faye says her friend called it the hardest but best decision she ever made. I felt sick hearing this story because it sounds exactly like mine, like someone copied my life and showed me the ending I don't want to see. I kept thinking about Faye's friend for the rest of the day, wondering if I'm looking at my own future. The wedding is in 2 months, and I'm already imagining calling it off, already playing out that conversation in my head. I drove home in silence because even music felt too loud. My fiancé is already there when I walk in, making dinner like everything is normal. We eat together, and I can't stop wondering if this is what Faye's friend did too, sitting across from her fiancé, pretending everything was fine while knowing it wasn't. That night, the night before our therapy appointment, my fiancé can't sleep. I hear him tossing around for an hour before he finally speaks. He tells me he's been having dreams about his childhood where Jane is crying and he can't comfort her, where he's small again and responsible for her happiness. He describes these dreams in detail, how in them she's always just out of reach and he's always failing her. I listen and realize this goes so much deeper than just this current fight about the wedding. This is 30 years of conditioning. 30 years of her making him responsible for her emotions. He was 6 when his dad left, and she turned him into her emotional support person, her therapist, her reason for existing. I reached over and held his hand in the dark, feeling sympathy for the little boy who had to carry that weight, but also feeling scared that the little boy is still running his decisions now. My phone buzzed the next morning while I'm getting ready for work. It's a text from Jane, then another, then 3 more in quick succession. I opened them and started reading these long messages about how she's been educating herself about Islam, how she wants to build bridges, how she understands now that she made mistakes. The words sound good on the surface, but the tone underneath is the same condescending voice she's always used with me. She uses phrases like, "I'm learning that you're people," and "I didn't realize your culture," like Islam is some exotic foreign concept instead of a major world religion. She talks about watching a documentary and reading an article like that makes her an expert now. Every message has this undertone of her doing me a favor by trying to understand, like I should be grateful she's putting in this effort. I screenshot all of them and sent them to Kiana. She called me immediately and pointed out what I already felt but couldn't put into words. Jane is trying to go around my fiancé to manipulate me directly. She's testing to see if I'll respond, if I'll engage with her, if she can create a separate relationship with me that bypasses his boundaries. Kiana suggests I don't respond at all. Just leave her on read and let her wonder. This felt right, but also scary because I know Jane well enough to know she'll escalate. Silence isn't something she handles well. I showed the texts to my fiancé that night and watched his jaw tighten as he read them. He didn't know she was texting me. He asked if I responded and seemed relieved when I said no. The next day, we sat in Sheldon's office for our first therapy session. The office was small and warm with too many plants and one of those sound machines that's supposed to be calming but just makes me need to pee. Sheldon is older than I expected, maybe 60, with gray hair and kind eyes that make me want to trust him. He asked us each to explain what we want from this process. My fiancé went first and said he wants to find a way to have both me and his mother in his life. Wants everyone to get along and be happy together. I felt my stomach drop hearing him say it like that, like it's possible. Like Jane is a reasonable person who just needs the right approach. When it's my turn, I say I want him to choose me without resentment. Want him to set boundaries with his mother and actually keep them. Want to start our marriage without her poison seeping into everything. Sheldon wrote notes on his pad, and I wonder what he's thinking if he already knows how this is going to end. He looked up and pointed out that those 2 goals might not be compatible. He asked my fiancé directly if he's prepared for the possibility that he can't have both, that choosing me might mean losing his relationship with Jane entirely. The look on my fiancé's face told me everything. He hasn't seriously considered that outcome. He's been operating under the assumption that there's some magic solution where everyone wins and no one has to sacrifice anything. Sheldon let that reality sit in the room for a minute before moving on to his next question. He had us do this exercise about family loyalty, where we talk about our earliest memories of learning what family means. My fiancé's voice changed when he talked about being 6 years old and his father leaving. He revealed that Jane raised him alone and made him her emotional support person, basically from that moment on. He talks about nights where she would cry and he would try to comfort her, about how she would tell him he was the only good man in her life, about how she made him promise never to leave her like his father did. He's crying now, actually crying in the therapist's office, and I'm sitting here realizing the guilt of abandoning her isn't about this current situation at all. It's about a promise a 6-year-old made to his devastated mother. It's about 30 years of being told he's responsible for her happiness. Sheldon asked him what it was like being his mother's emotional support at that age, and my fiancé just shook his head like he can't find words. I reached over and squeezed his hand because even though I'm angry and scared, I also feel sympathy for what he went through. But then Sheldon said something that changed the whole room. He pointed out gently that being Jane's emotional support person isn't the same as being her child. He explained that she parentified him, made him responsible for her emotional needs when he should have been allowed to just be a kid. My fiancé looked at Sheldon like this idea never occurred to him before, like someone just told him the sky is actually green. He sat there processing this new information while I watched his entire understanding of his childhood shift. After the session ended, we sat in the car in the parking lot for 30 minutes. Neither of us wanted to drive yet. My fiancé stared out the windshield and admitted he doesn't know how to separate his obligation to his mother from his obligation to himself and to me. He says it feels like choosing me means killing her, like he's responsible for her survival. I told him that's exactly what parentification does. It makes kids feel responsible for their parents' lives. He asked how I know that word, and I told him I Googled it after Sheldon said it, read 3 articles on my phone while he was in the bathroom. We sat there as the sun went down and the parking lot emptied around us. He asked me if I think he can change, and I told him honestly that I don't know, but I know he has to want to change for himself, not just for me. He nodded and finally started the car. We drove home in silence, but it's a different kind of silence than before. It felt less like avoiding and more like processing. When we got home, he went straight to the bedroom and I heard him on the phone. I can't make out the words, but I know from his tone he's talking to Jane. I waited in the living room, my heart pounding, wondering if this is where everything falls apart. I heard him hang up and walk back to the bedroom. He came out 20 minutes later and sat next to me on the couch without saying anything. I waited for him to explain who he was talking to, but he just stared at his hands. Finally, I asked what Jane said, and he shook his head like he's trying to clear it. She told him she's been in bed for 3 days, unable to eat or sleep. She said she's been praying constantly for God to change my heart. She claimed she went to her pastor for guidance, and he told her that sometimes you have to let go of what you love most to save it. My fiancé repeated this last part twice, like he's trying to figure out what it means. I pointed out that it sounds like her pastor told her to back off and she's twisting it into something else entirely. He nodded slowly and admits that's probably true, but hearing her voice made him feel like a kid again, like he was responsible for fixing her pain. We sat there in silence for a while, and I can feel the weight of 30 years of guilt sitting between us on the couch. The next evening, Danielle called while we're eating dinner. My fiancé put her on speaker, and she sounded furious right from the start. She told us Jane has been calling family members all day, saying I'm persecuting her for her Christian faith. Danielle says Jane is telling everyone that we're trying to erase her beliefs and force her to accept sin. She's apparently created a whole story where she's the victim of religious discrimination and I'm some kind of extremist. Danielle kept apologizing and saying she can't believe her own sister would lie like this. My fiancé asked why Jane can't just leave us alone, and I heard actual anger in his voice instead of the usual defensiveness. Danielle says she doesn't know, but she wanted us to hear it from her before other family members started calling. After we hung up, I looked at my fiancé and saw him directing his frustration at the right person for once. He says he's sick of his mother making him choose between defending her and defending reality. The relief I feel is so strong, it almost makes me dizzy. Our second therapy session happened 3 days later, and Sheldon asked my fiancé what he thinks will happen if Jane comes to the wedding. My fiancé started to say she'll behave because it's such an important day, but then he stopped mid-sentence. He sat there quiet for a long moment before admitting he has no actual evidence she'll control herself. Sheldon nodded and asked what evidence he does have about how she behaves in important situations. My fiancé listed the pork incident, the hijab comment, showing up at our house screaming, the Facebook posts, calling family members with lies. As he talked, I watched his face change like he's seeing a pattern he never noticed before. Sheldon asked if there's any reason to believe the wedding would be different from these other situations, and my fiancé can't come up with an answer. Then Sheldon turned to me and asked what I'm most afraid of regarding the wedding. I told him I'm scared Jane will object during the ceremony or cause a scene during the reception. I described how every time I think about walking down the aisle, I picture her standing up and shouting about how I'm leading her son to hell. I explained that this fear is poisoning what should be the happiest day of my life, and I can't even enjoy planning anymore. My fiancé looked devastated as I'm talking, and I can see him realizing what his wavering has cost me. He reached for my hand and squeezed it hard like he's trying to communicate something he can't say out loud yet. Sheldon let us sit with that feeling for a full minute before he speaks again. He gave us homework before we leave. My fiancé has to write down every boundary Jane has violated and what he did in response each time. I have to write down what I need from him to feel safe moving forward with the wedding. Sheldon says to be specific and honest, even if it feels harsh or scary. We drove home in silence, and I can tell we're both dreading this assignment. Working on the homework over the next few days was brutal for both of us. I sat at the kitchen table while my fiancé worked in the bedroom because we agreed we needed space to think clearly. I can hear him in there sometimes making frustrated sounds or getting up to pace. When he finally showed me his list 3 days later, it's 3 pages long in his small handwriting. He kept stopping as I read it to say he can't believe he let her do certain things. There were incidents I didn't even know about, like the time she told his college girlfriend that he was only dating her to rebel against God, or when she showed up at his first apartment and rearranged everything because she said it was decorated like a bachelor who didn't know Jesus. He wrote down at least 15 times where he either made excuses for her or tried to smooth things over instead of setting boundaries. Reading it made me sad for him and angry at her in equal measure. My list is shorter but clearer. I need him to tell Jane she's not invited to the wedding and stick to it no matter what she says or does. I need him to block her number for at least 3 months so we can start our marriage without her constant interference. I need him to commit to ongoing therapy, both for us as a couple and for himself individually, to deal with how she raised him. I also write that I need him to stop making excuses for her behavior or trying to translate her cruelty into something more acceptable. When I showed him the list, he read it twice and then nodded slowly. He didn't argue with any of it or try to negotiate. He just says these seem fair and he'll do them. At our next session, Sheldon had us share our homework out loud. My fiancé went first, and he started crying halfway through reading his list. His voice broke when he got to the part about how she made him feel responsible for her happiness after his dad left. He says he feels like he's been in a fog his whole life and is just now seeing how strange his relationship with his mother actually is. Sheldon asked gentle questions about specific incidents, and my fiancé kept saying he thought that was just how mothers and sons were supposed to be. I reached over and held his hand while he cries because even though I'm angry about his wavering, I also feel sympathy for what he went through growing up. When it's my turn to share my list, I read it clearly and firmly. My fiancé listened without interrupting, and when I finished, he told Sheldon that everything I wrote is reasonable. Sheldon asked him what he wants his relationship with Jane to look like in 5 years. My fiancé thought for a long time before answering. He says he wants to be able to see her occasionally, but not have her control his life or his decisions. He wants to be able to tell her no without feeling like he's killing her. It's the first time I've ever heard him talk about wanting actual distance from her instead of just managing her better. Sheldon wrote something down and told us this is significant progress. 2 days before our 4th session, my fiancé got a text from his mother asking what time our therapy appointment is. He didn't tell her we were going to therapy and definitely didn't tell her when. We realized she must have gone through his phone records or followed us or something equally invasive. He didn't respond to her text, but we both felt uneasy about her knowing. When we arrived at Sheldon's office for our appointment, Jane was sitting in the waiting room. She stood up when she saw us and started walking toward my fiancé with her arms out like she expects a hug. Security appeared immediately because apparently Sheldon warned the front desk this might happen. 2 security guards asked Jane to leave and she refused. She started shouting about how we're turning her son against her with lies and therapy is brainwashing. She yelled that she has a right to save her son from making the biggest mistake of his life. The security guards took her arms and walked her toward the exit while she screamed the whole way. Other people in the waiting room stared at us, and I felt my face burning with embarrassment. My fiancé just stood there frozen, watching his mother get escorted out like she's a stranger he's never seen before. Sheldon's office felt different now. The calm, safe space where we'd been slowly working through everything just witnessed Jane at her absolute worst. My fiancé sat next to me on the couch, and I can see his hands shaking in his lap. He kept opening his mouth like he wants to say something, then closing it again. Sheldon gave us a moment before speaking, his voice gentle but direct. He asked my fiancé what he's feeling right now, and my fiancé's response came out strangled and raw. He says he's embarrassed that his mother acted that way in front of strangers, that she showed up here after everything we talked about in therapy. He says he's angry at her for not respecting our boundaries, even when we're trying to fix things. His voice cracks when he admits he's scared of what else she might do if we don't give in to her demands. I reached over and took his hand, and he gripped mine so tight it almost hurts. Sheldon wrote something in his notebook and told us that what just happened was actually valuable, even though it felt awful. He explains that Jane revealed exactly who she is when she doesn't get her way, and my fiancé saw it without any filters or explanations from either of us. My fiancé nodded slowly, still staring at the floor. Sheldon asked him directly if he's ready to set real boundaries with his mother, the kind that have actual consequences when she breaks them. My fiancé looked up at me, then back at Sheldon, and said yes, in a voice that sounds more certain than I've heard from him in weeks. Sheldon pulled out a notepad and suggested we practice the conversation my fiancé needs to have with Jane. He explained that we'll role-play it here where it's safe, so my fiancé can find the right words before he actually makes the call. My fiancé looked nervous but agrees. Sheldon asked me if I'm willing to play Jane for this exercise, and I say yes. Even though the idea of channeling her makes my skin crawl, we spent a few minutes setting it up with Sheldon coaching my fiancé on what he needs to communicate clearly. The main points are simple, but hard for my fiancé to say out loud. Jane isn't invited to the wedding. He's blocking her number for 3 months. When they reconnect, it will be on his terms with strict rules about how she treats me. We start the role play, and I do my best Jane impression, which isn't difficult after 3 years of her garbage. I cry. I guilt trip. I bring up his dead grandmother, who would be so disappointed in him. My fiancé stumbled at first, his voice wavering when I hit him with the manipulation tactics. But Sheldon coached him through it, reminding him to stay focused on his main points no matter what I throw at him. We did it 3 times, and each time my fiancé got stronger, his voice more firm. By the third run-through, when I pulled out Jane's favorite line about being a terrible son, he didn't even flinch. He just repeated that the wedding is happening without her and hung up the pretend phone. Sheldon looked proud, and honestly, so am I. That evening, we sat on our couch at home, and my fiancé has his phone in his hand. He's been staring at it for 10 minutes, working up the courage to actually call Jane. I sat next to him with my hand on his knee, trying to give him strength without saying anything that might make this harder. He finally took a deep breath and dialed her number. She answered on the first ring, her voice already shaky, like she's been crying. My fiancé put the phone on speaker so I can hear, and Jane immediately launched into an apology that sounds rehearsed. She says she's so sorry for showing up at the therapist's office. She just loves him so much and couldn't stand the thought of losing him. My fiancé cut her off mid-sentence and tells her he needs to say something, and she needs to listen without interrupting. There's silence on the other end, and I can practically hear her holding her breath. He told her she's not invited to the wedding. She started to protest, but he talked over her, his voice steady in a way I've never heard before. He says he's blocking her number for 3 months, and when that time is up, they'll talk about what their relationship looks like going forward. He explains that any contact with me needs to be respectful, and if she can't manage that, she won't have contact with either of us. Jane's silence broke into full sobbing. She cycled through every trick in her playbook. First, she cried and begged, telling him he's breaking her heart, and she doesn't know how she'll survive this. When that doesn't work, she switches to anger, saying he's being manipulated by me and throwing away his family for some girl he barely knows. My fiancé stayed calm and repeated that his decision is final. Jane tried guilt next, bringing up every sacrifice she made raising him alone after his dad left. She listed them one by one, her voice getting more frantic with each memory. Then she threatened to disown him, to write him out of her will, to tell everyone in the family what a horrible son he is. My fiancé's hand tightened on his phone, but his voice doesn't waver when he says that's her choice to make. Finally, Jane claimed she's having chest pains and might need to go to the hospital. She says the stress of this conversation is literally killing her, and if something happens to her, it'll be on his conscience. I see my fiancé's face flicker with worry for just a second, but then he looks at me and seems to remember everything we talked about in therapy. He tells her to call 911 if she's having a medical emergency, but he's not changing his decision. Jane gasped like she can't believe he's not falling for it. She tried one more time, her voice small and broken, asking if he really means to cut her out of the most important day of his life. My fiancé says, yes, he really means it. And then he hangs up. The apartment goes completely silent. My fiancé sat there holding his phone, and I watch his whole body start to shake. But it's different from the shaking in Sheldon's office earlier. This feels like relief mixed with adrenaline, like he just survived something terrifying and came out the other side. He sets his phone down on the coffee table and blocks Jane's number right there in front of me, his fingers steady on the screen. When it's done, he turns to me and his eyes are wet, but he's almost smiling. He says he's never stood up to her like that in his entire life. His voice cracks when he admits how scared he was, but also how right it felt to finally say no to her without apologizing or explaining or trying to make her feel better about it. I pull him into a hug and feel him collapse against me, all the tension draining out of his body at once. We sat like that for a long time, just holding each other while he processes what just happened. He tells me he kept hearing Sheldon's voice in his head, reminding him to stick to his main points. And every time Jane tried a new manipulation tactic, he recognized it from our practice session. He says he couldn't have done it without that preparation, without me sitting next to him as backup. I tell him I'm proud of him, and I mean it more than I've meant almost anything. The next few days feel like we're living in a completely different apartment. The heavy cloud that's been hanging over us since Jane's crying phone call finally lifts. We actually laugh together again. Real laughs that aren't forced or covering up tension. We make dinner together and talk about the wedding without that knot of anxiety in my stomach about whether she'll ruin everything. One night, we're washing dishes side by side, and he makes some stupid joke about my terrible dish drying technique, and I splash him with soapy water. It turns into a whole thing with both of us laughing so hard we can barely breathe. And then we're kissing against the counter like we did when we first started dating. We end up in bed, and it's different from it's been in weeks. There's no tension between us, no unspoken worry about his mother lurking in the background of every touch. Afterward, we lie there talking about honeymoon plans and which of our friends will definitely get drunk and embarrass themselves at the reception. He tells me he feels lighter than he has in months, maybe years. I tell him I can see it in his face, how the constant stress of managing Jane isn't pulling at him anymore. We stay up late looking at the wedding venue photos on my laptop, actually excited about our wedding day instead of dreading it. My phone rings while I'm making coffee, and I see Danielle's name on the screen. I answer, and she launches right in, telling me that Jane is having a complete breakdown with the extended family. Apparently, Jane called everyone she could think of, crying about how her son abandoned her and banned her from the wedding over nothing. Danielle says most of the family is supporting our decision, especially after the Facebook posts exposed Jane's behavior. She tells me that Jane's own siblings are tired of her drama and bigotry, and several of them have reached out to my fiancé directly to say they'll be at the wedding, and they're glad he finally set boundaries. Danielle sounds almost gleeful when she describes how Jane tried to get her church friends to pressure my fiancé into changing his mind, but even they weren't willing to get involved after seeing her racist comments online. She says Jane is isolated now in a way she's never been before, and it's entirely her own doing. I thank Danielle for the update and for supporting us through all of this. She tells me she's known for years that Jane needed someone to stand up to her, and she's just glad her nephew finally found the courage to do it. After we hang up, I tell my fiancé what Danielle said, and I can see the relief on his face knowing his extended family has our backs. At work the next day, I find Faye in the break room and tell her everything that happened. I explain about the therapy session, about Jane showing up and getting escorted out by security, about my fiancé's phone call where he finally set real boundaries. Faye pulls me into a hug right there by the coffee maker and says she's proud of us for doing the hard work. She tells me that most couples would have given up or given in by now, but we stuck it out and fought for our relationship. Her support means more than she probably knows because I felt so alone through this whole thing. Most of my friends don't really get it. They just think I should have cut my fiancé loose the first time he wavered. But Faye understands that real relationships are messy and complicated, and sometimes the right choice is to stay and fight through the hard stuff together. She asks about the wedding planning, and I realize I'm actually excited to talk about it now instead of anxious. We spent our whole lunch break looking at photos of my dress and the venue decorations on my phone, and it feels normal and happy in a way it hasn't in weeks. That evening, my fiancé got a text from someone named Enrique. I asked who that is, and he explains it's his childhood best friend, who he hasn't talked to much in the past few years. Enrique heard through the family network about the boundaries my fiancé set with Jane, and he wanted to reach out. My fiancé calls him back and puts the phone on speaker so I can hear. Enrique sounded genuinely happy and tells my fiancé he's glad he finally stood up to his mom. Then he says something that makes both of us go quiet. He explains that Jane is the reason they stopped being close friends in the first place. Back in college, Enrique started dating a girl Jane didn't approve of, and Jane made it her mission to convince my fiancé that Enrique was a bad influence. She called constantly, showed up at their apartment unannounced, made scenes in front of Enrique's girlfriend. Eventually, it was just easier for my fiancé to distance himself from Enrique than to deal with Jane's constant interference. Enrique says he understood even back then that it wasn't really my fiancé's fault, that Jane had been controlling his relationship since they were kids. He mentions other friends who drifted away over the years because Jane made it too difficult to stay close. My fiancé looked devastated hearing this, like he's just realizing how much of his life his mother has controlled without him even noticing. After the call with Enrique ends, we sat together on the couch and my fiancé was quiet for a long time. I can see him processing everything, connecting dots he never saw before. He started talking about other friendships that faded away, relationships that ended for reasons he couldn't quite understand at the time. He realizes now that Jane was always there in the background, stirring up drama or making things difficult until people gave up and left. He tells me about his ex-girlfriend who Jane called a demon worshiper because she did yoga and read tarot cards. About his college roommate who stopped coming around after Jane accused him of stealing. About the girl he dated in high school, whose family Jane spread rumors about in church. Each story makes me understand his struggle better, makes me see how deep Jane's manipulation goes. This wasn't just about me and our wedding. This has been his entire life, with Jane systematically cutting him off from anyone who might challenge her control over him. I feel more compassion for how hard this has been for him, how much courage it took to finally break that pattern. We talked late into the night about what we want our family to look like, the kind of home we want to build together. He says he wants our kids to grow up surrounded by people who love them without conditions, who celebrate their choices instead of trying to control them. We make plans for building our own traditions separate from Jane's toxic influence, for creating a life that's actually ours instead of shaped by her demands. By the time we finally go to bed, I feel closer to him than I have in months. Like we're finally on the same team, fighting the same battle instead of pulled in different directions. Our next therapy session with Sheldon happened on a Thursday afternoon, and we both felt lighter walking in than we have in weeks. Sheldon greeted us with his usual calm smile and settled into his chair across from us. He asks how we've been since our last session, and my fiancé tells him about the conversation with Enrique, about all the realizations he's had about his mother's control. Sheldon nodded like he expected this breakthrough, and then he leaned forward with his hands folded. He says, "We've made remarkable progress in a short time," and he wants to know what we've each learned from this process. My fiancé went first, and his voice is steady when he speaks. He says he learned that loving someone doesn't mean accepting their abuse, that he can care about his mother while still protecting himself and me from her toxicity. He talks about how he always thought setting boundaries meant he was being cruel, but now he understands that boundaries are actually an act of love for himself and for our relationship. I feel proud of him as he speaks, seeing how much he's grown in just a few weeks. When it's my turn, I tell Sheldon that I learn my partner's willingness to grow is more important than his starting point. I explain that I was so focused on the fact that he wavered, that he considered letting Jane back in, that I almost missed seeing how hard he was working to change those patterns. I say, I learned that growth isn't linear, that sometimes people need to stumble before they can really move forward. Sheldon looked pleased with both our answers, and he tells us that the work we've done together shows real commitment to building a healthy foundation. We spent the rest of the session talking about our future, about what happens after the wedding. My fiancé brings up the fact that Jane will probably try to resurface eventually, that she won't just disappear forever. I agree, and I tell Sheldon that I'm worried about how we'll handle it when she does try to worm her way back in. Sheldon asked if we'd be interested in continuing therapy after the wedding as a way to keep building the tools we'll need for those future challenges. We both say yes immediately, and it feels good to know we won't be facing this alone. Sheldon says he's confident in our foundation now, that we've proven we can work through hard things together. He reminds us that the goal isn't to never have conflict, but to handle conflict in healthy ways. We leave his office holding hands, and I feel more hopeful about our marriage than I have in months. 3 weeks before the wedding, we sat down together at our kitchen table with our laptop open. We've been talking about sending one final message to all our wedding guests just to make absolutely sure everyone understands that Jane is not welcome. My fiancé drafted the email while I looked over his shoulder, and we went back and forth on the wording until it felt right. The message was clear and direct. We reaffirmed that Jane is banned from our wedding, and we explained that anyone who brings her or helps her attend will be asked to leave immediately. We say we know this puts people in an awkward position, but our wedding day is about celebrating our love, not managing his mother's behavior. My fiancé hit send, and we both stared at the screen for a minute, wondering how people will react. Within an hour, the responses start coming in. Every single one is supportive. Danielle writes back, saying she's proud of us for standing firm. My friends from college say they'll personally block Jane if she tries anything. Even some of my fiancé's extended family members, people who were initially upset about the Facebook drama, sent messages saying they understand and support our decision. Reading through all the responses makes me emotional. And my fiancé wrapped his arms around me from behind while I sat at the table. He whispered that we're going to be okay, that we have so many people on our side. A few days later, my cousin Harmony and her husband drove up to help with final wedding preparations. Seeing them walk through our door feels like a relief, like having backup arrive when you've been fighting alone for too long. Harmony hugged me tight and tells me she's been thinking about us constantly since we talked on the phone. Her husband shook my fiancé's hand and immediately starts helping us organize the seating chart we've been struggling with. Over dinner that night, Harmony and her husband tell us stories about their own interfaith wedding, about the challenges they faced with both their families. Watching them together, seeing how solid their marriage is after 5 years, gives me real hope for our future. Her husband turns to my fiancé at one point and says something that really lands. He says standing up to toxic family isn't a one-time event. It's an ongoing practice. He explains that even now, years later, he still has to set boundaries with certain relatives who don't respect Harmony's faith. My fiancé listened carefully, and I can see him absorbing this perspective, understanding that what we're doing now is just the beginning of a lifelong process. The next weekend, Kiana and Tyson host a small pre-wedding dinner for us at their house with our closest friends. Walking into their home and seeing all these people we love gathered together makes me want to cry happy tears. Kiana has cooked this amazing meal, and Tyson set up the dining room so we can all sit together. During dinner, people take turns standing up to toast us, and every speech is about our courage and protecting our relationship. One of my friends from work talks about how inspiring it's been to watch us set boundaries with Jane. Another friend says she learned from our example that it's okay to cut off toxic family members. My fiancé squeezed my hand under the table, and when it's his turn to speak, he thanks everyone for being the family we chose. He says he finally understands the difference between blood relatives and real family, and that everyone in this room is real family. I look around at all these faces, people who actually respect and love us, and I feel surrounded by support in a way I've never experienced before. The next week, the imam I've known since childhood comes to our apartment to discuss the Islamic part of our ceremony. I've been nervous about this meeting because I want my fiancé to understand how important these traditions are to me, and I'm worried he might feel uncomfortable or out of place. But from the moment the imam arrives, my fiancé is engaged and respectful. He asks thoughtful questions about what each part of the ceremony means, about why certain prayers are recited, about how he should participate. The imam explains everything patiently, and I can see my fiancé genuinely trying to understand and honor my faith. At one point, the imam talks about the importance of mutual respect in an interfaith marriage, and my fiancé nodded seriously. He tells the imam that he's committed to supporting my practice of Islam, that he wants our future children to know both our traditions. Hearing him say this, seeing how much effort he's putting into understanding what matters to me, I realize this is everything I wanted from the beginning. This is what I needed from Jane and never got, this basic respect for who I am. 2 weeks before the wedding, We're lying in bed one night when my fiancé turns to me with this sad look on his face. He admits that he feels sad his mother won't be at the wedding. That despite everything, there's a part of him that wishes things were different. I felt a rush of sympathy for him because I can see he's genuinely grieving. I hold him while he talks about the mother he wishes he had, the one who would be excited about our wedding instead of trying to destroy it. He cries a little and I just let him, rubbing his back and listening. He says he knows Jane being banned is necessary, that he's not questioning that decision, but he needed to acknowledge the sadness anyway. I tell him it's okay to grieve, that wanting a better mother doesn't mean he has to accept the one he actually has. We stayed like that for a long time, and I feel closer to him in this moment of vulnerability than in any of our happy moments. A few days later, we got a letter in the mail from some of Jane's church friends. The envelope has a return address I don't recognize, and when we open it, there's this long letter about prayer and reconciliation. The people who wrote it say they've been praying for our family and they hope we'll reconsider banning Jane from the wedding. They quote Bible verses about forgiveness and honoring your parents. My fiancé reads the whole thing out loud, and by the end we're both just tired. We looked at each other, and without saying anything, we both walked to the kitchen trash can. My fiancé tears the letter in half and drops it in, and I throw the envelope in after it. He says he's done letting other people's opinions dictate our choices, and I tell him I'm proud of him. We don't talk about the letter again. The week of the wedding arrives, and suddenly everything starts coming together in this beautiful way. The halal catering company calls to confirm our menu, and they've added this special dessert as a wedding gift. The venue coordinator sends photos of how they've set up the space, and it looks perfect. My fiancé and I sit together reviewing the interfaith ceremony script one more time, making sure it honors both our traditions equally. Reading through the vows we wrote, seeing how we've blended Islamic and Christian elements in a way that respects both, I feel genuinely excited instead of anxious. For weeks, the wedding has felt like this source of stress and conflict. But now it's starting to feel like what it should be, a celebration of our love. My fiancé looks up from the script and asks if I'm happy, and I realize I actually am. The day before the wedding, my phone rings and it's Danielle. She says she wanted to call and wish us well before the big day. We talk for a few minutes about last-minute details, and then her voice gets more serious. She mentions that Jane has been unusually quiet lately, that she hasn't been posting on Facebook or calling family members. Danielle says this worries her more than Jane's usual drama because quiet Jane is unpredictable Jane. She warns us to